KCPE Exam Center Day 2 with candidates seating for their Science, Kiswahili, Insha and Kenyan Sign Language papers today amid challenges in distributing exam material in some areas.
And across the borders, Argentina forward Lionel Messi wins the Ballon d'Or for an 8th time after helping his country win the World Cup in Qatar last year, with Manchester City's Erling Haaland and France's Kylian Mbappe coming second and third respectively.
Lionel Messi is infinity. Congratulations to him.
As much as I'm a Ronaldo fan,
I know Emmanuel, our director, would have wished that Kylian Mbappe gets it. But, well, Lionel Messi has it for the 8th time in a row. How about that?
Oh, yes.
Well, good morning. Welcome to this edition of Morning Cafe. My name is Freddie Ndimuli. 55 days to Christmas. We continue with our Christmas countdown and also a very special day to one of us. Happy birthday, Limuki.
Happy birthday, Limuki.
Thank you. You should sing.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Limuki. Happy birthday to you.
we do make a good band.
Oh, yeah, we can.
Oh, yes.
We should try.
You guys tried.
And I'm yours truly, Stanley Yerungita, most definitely welcome to your #1 breakfast show. This is going to be a whole special coverage, even as we take a look at the touchdown of the royal family. King Charles III and Queen Camilla touched down at Kenya, rather in Kenya, yesterday at around 10:46 p.m. We'll be taking a look at the UK, also Kenya relations, so stick around for that in this extensive broadcast.
Indeed, a very special day, not only to Kenya, but also to me.
So basically today is International
Flora Limuki Day, yeah? It just coincides with the King's and Queen's visit to Kenya. Anyway, welcome to Morning Cafe. This beautiful morning, the 31st of October, 2023. It's good to have you, and you can always interact with us at TV47 News on X, TV47 Kenya on Facebook. The hashtag is Morning Cafe. I'm Flora Limuki.
Yes, to the big story now. King Charles III has arrived in Kenya, accompanied by Queen Camilla, kicking off a 4-day historic visit. The Royal Air Force plane carrying the King and the Queen touched down at the JKIA shortly before 11 p.m. on Monday. This morning, Queen Camilla is expected to meet First Lady Mama Rachel Ruto at State House, where she will be taken through the First Lady's activities, including women economic empowerment programs. A formal ceremonial welcome is also scheduled at State House, Nairobi, ahead of talks with President William Ruto, where the royal couple will receive full military honors. Now, the King and Queen have an elaborate itinerary in Nairobi and Mombasa in this historic visit aimed at solidifying Kenya-UK relations. However, much of the focus ahead of the trip has been on colonial rule, with the palace saying Charles is expected to tackle the more painful aspects of British historic relationship with Kenya. Rights groups and survivors have exerted pressure since last week, demanding a public apology and reparations in billions. That's a top story this morning. Let's now get the day's diary.
And top on the list of our diary this morning has to do with the King Charles visit, and King Charles III, together with Queen Camilla, expected to jet in the country. Well, they're expected to get in the country today, but they jumped in yesterday, and the King plans to visit Nairobi National Park. Fred was talking about a whole planned itinerary, and just to mention, King Charles visiting Nairobi National Park. Activist.
Thank you.
Late Nobel laureate. This will be the Majesty's first trip to a Commonwealth nation since his success last year. Away from that, let's flip the page, and at least 1.4 million candidates will today be writing the science and English papers in the last KCPE exams and KPSEA exams. Entered this, even as the KCPE and KPSEA exams have entered day 2 nationwide. Today also is KCSE week 2, and KCSE enters week 2 with over 10,700 exam centers as they continue with a section of the candidates undertaking their home science practical exams. Exams are set to conclude on the 24th of November 2023. And as we flip the page, matters Senate order of business. The first bit and the major bit around the afternoon order of business, they'll be adopting the report of the Shakahola Ad Hoc Committee chaired by Tana River Senator Danson Mungatana. Other motions to be tabled on the floor of the House include the Tea Amendment Bill as well as the County Boundaries Bill. Today, guys, by the way, is Halloween. This is a whole widely celebrated holiday known for its spooky and festive atmosphere. It's a time when people of all ages come together to enjoy costume parties, trick-or-treating, haunted houses, and various other Halloween traditions. So I guess happy Halloween, if you really understand.
I'm not so sure what they do during Halloween. I only know of Christmas, and we are way off.
Well, and that's on
African parents don't like that day.
Oh, yes.
That's Uchawi. If you ask where I come from, that's it's unheard of.
Okay. And well, away from that, in today's history, back in 1922, Benito Mussolini was appointed as the Prime Minister of Italy by King Victor Emmanuel III. So Mussolini not only became the youngest individual to hold the office up to that time, but was also the first of Europe's fascist dictators in the 20th century. And in 1984, Indian Prime Minister Indira Gandhi was assassinated at her residence in Safjadunj Road, New Delhi. She was killed by her Sikh bodyguards in the aftermath of Operation Blue Star. The assassination sparked 4 days of riots that left more than 8,000 Indian Sikhs dead in revenge attacks. This is a brief of the news diary and also the Today in History. As you continue, we'll be updating you. But remember, this particular morning focusing on our special coverage on the King's visit. And right now you can dive into the dailies this morning. Fred, see the Standard focusing on matters, the last KCPE.
Yes, let's take a look at the dailies. This morning we kick off with the Standard. The big headline there, out goes KCPE, in comes new exams, turning a new leaf. Whereas learners have been used to cutthroat competition, the new testing format aims to create a less burdensome and more student-friendly way of assessing candidates, relieving the pressure of chasing top scores. This was our big discussion yesterday, matters transition in education from 844 to CBC. The story has been extensively covered on pages 4 and 5 of the Standard today. That's a big headline. Some snippets there about the changes. One, KPSEA, designed for grade 6 students under the new CBC framework, is now in its second year. Secondly, moving from primary to junior school will be automatic regardless of the score the candidate poses in the KPSEA. Thirdly, the approach aims to support the development and growth of young learners without the pressure of achieving top scores. And fourth, unlike KCPE, which accounts for the final score a candidate achieves, under KPSEA, the score will be a combination of class-based assessment and final score. That's the main story on the Standard today. Other highlights given prominence on the front page: what austerity? JSC picks Dubai for accounting induction. As the government moves to reduce spending on international travel, the top judiciary staff have decided to spend 13 days in a Dubai hotel for boardroom training and induction. The story is on page 8. Interesting. Elsewhere, interview wars for nominee ambassadors. Quite a number of nominated ambassadors are appearing before MPs for vetting as they look to take up their appointments. On the top strip of the Standard this morning, British monarch survives where many have failed, and the story is our special coverage, yes, on the visit by King Charles III and Queen Camilla. And on the Standard, it's received quite some coverage on pages 6 and 7. Let me just check if it has any special title. Not really. Yeah, British monarchy has survived for centuries as others collapsed. A commentary there by Biketi Kikechi. And back to the front page. On the Financial Standard pull out this morning, sectors that have reaped from weak shilling, how agents take coffee farmers for a ride. That's a Financial Standard. And finally, in sports, memorable moments from Rugby World Cup, and that story is on page 38. Let's flip over the paper. Let's look at the back page. Sports. Look at us. Do you see anything to smile about? And this is a once upon a time great team called Manchester United. Now reeling under the pressure of back-to-back losses. And Eric Ten Hag, the Manchester United manager, says, when you lose a derby in the way we lose, it's disappointing. First half, we had a very good game plan and the execution was very good. And then the penalty changed the moment. And it looks like we'll be discussing Manchester United for the rest of the week.
Yeah. Right now you should have it as a special coverage. Yes. Of the entire show.
Now that the king is here, I think we can focus a little bit more on the English Premier League.
Oh, yes.
And talk about the kind of tidings that Manchester United is looking at. And that's the Standard today. Of course, a big story being matters KCPE.
Well, let's have a look at the Daily Nation. Quite a busy front page there. And the top headline, Kenya's top counties. And this is according to more than 70% of respondents say devolution has made their lives better. This is according to the report by Infotrack yesterday. And devolved units from the Rift Valley dominate the top 10 places in the latest County Performance Index by Infotrack, with neighbors Uasin Gishu and Elgeyo Marakwet taking joint lead, but counties from other parts of the country also show their mettle in sector listings, and that story there is extensively covered on page 9, 10, and 11 of the Daily Nation this morning. And just looking at the top counties in matters education, West Pokot is leading. In matters agriculture, Uasin Gishu is leading. Matters roads, Nyeri County is leading. And matters culture and sports, Elgeyo Marakwet is leading. And top 25 counties overall, the top 5 include Uasin Gishu, Elgeyo Marakwet, Trans Nzoia County, Kericho, Nandi, and Bomet, and some of the, I'm trying to locate where Meru or Nairobi is.
Meru is number 24.
And Meru, we are at 24. And seems like Nairobi is not to be seen among the top 25 counties. Yes, and that is what we have, that report there by Infotrack is on extensively covered on page 9, 10, and 11.
Interestingly on that one, I think the company that undertook this survey noted that the counties headed by women, all the 7 counties, performed relatively well. And so they were saying that probably women make better administrators. Well, let's wait and see.
Oh, yeah. Because I see, where is Kwale County? Yeah, you can see Nakuru is here. Kirinyaga is here as well.
Machakos,
not really. Yes, there are maybe four out of the 7 counties that are led by women are leading. Of course, I don't expect to see Meru County at top 25 because of the very busy thing that we've been doing the last 1 year. And still looking at the Daily Nation, on the top strip of the Daily Nation, Ruto rules out fees increase as KCPE KPSEA exams start. And the last KCPE examinations and Kenya primary school education assessment kicked off to a smooth start in various parts of the country yesterday, with senior government officials monitoring the exercise. And Yes, that story there is on page 2 and 3 of the Daily Nation, and of course KCPE and KPSEA enters day 2 today, as we expect those exams to come to an end tomorrow. Let's have a look at what we have on the right strip of the Daily Nation this morning. King Charles III and Queen Camilla start 4-day Kenya trip. It will be a busy few days for British royals who arrive today to a packed itinerary, including a visit to a Mombasa mosque to meet Muslim leaders. And that story is on page 4 and 5 of the Daily Nation. Looking at matters technology, 5 local startups make the cut for Africa Tech Contest, as 5 Kenyan tech startups have made it to the top 10 list for the upcoming Africa Ignite, a pitch competition to be held in Cape Town in the next 2 weeks. And that story there is on page 8 of the Daily Nation. Reminds me of that plant assembly that was launched yesterday by the president. And looking at some matters politics, Azimio protest police raid on Arati's office. It was a day of drama in Kisii town yesterday after a heavy contingent of Armed General Service Unit GSU officers invaded the Gusii Stadium office of Governor Simba Arati. Yes, and there's a special feature of how Kiambu County has improved in key sectors over the last 1 year. That story is on page 12 to 13 of the Daily Nation. Let's now have a look at the back page of the Daily Nation. Ruto unveils first phone assembly plant, and 7,499 shillings is the cost of inaugural 4G enabled Neon 5 smartphone on display at the firm. Yes, and the president yesterday launched the East Africa Device Assembly Kenya Limited AirDAC factory in Athi River, Machakos County, making the first mobile phone assembly facility in Kenya. And yes, that is what we have on the Daily Nation this morning.
All right, and on Business Daily, still just picking up from where we've left on the back page of Daily Nation Matters, the first phone assembly plant. The front page of Business Daily, it is a big story. Smartphone plant rose to life amid price standoff. They also talk about Safaricom-led consortium pushing for subsidy, as well as introductory prices higher than Chinese imports. Other stories making it to Business Daily. Cheap loans dry up as Hustler Fund budget cut to 5 billion Kenyan shillings. That is on the bottom strip there. And on the right side, on that ticker, letter of credit scare in Kenya Gulf fuel deal. In matters economy, Nairobi braces for traffic interruptions on King Charles' visit. And just a brief of that, Nairobi residents should brace for traffic interruptions during King Charles III and Queen Camilla's state visit to Kenya. They're expected to be in Kenya for a 4-day visit from 31st of October to November the 3rd. And for that, in matters markets, 5.5 billion Kenyan shillings Old Mutual Tower up for sale. And that is on the front page of Business Daily.
Okay. Tuangazie gazeti la Taifa Leo. Habari kuu kwenye ukurasa wa mbele wa Taifa Leo, karibu Kenya. Mfalme wa Uingereza atazuru majiji ya Nairobi na Mombasa kwenye ziara yake ya siku 4. Hatarajiwi kuzungumza masuala tata ya ukatili na unyakuzi wa ardhi enzi za ukoloni. Habari kamili kwenye ukurasa wa pili wa gazeti la Taifa Leo. Historia, Kenya ikiwa nchi ya kwanza Afrika na nje ya Ulaya kutembelewa na Charles wa 3 akiwa mfalme wa Uingereza. Habari zingine zilizopewa kipaumbele kwenye ukurasa wa mbele wa Taifa Leo, Trans Nzoia juu kwa ustawi, utafiti wa baini. Kaunti hiyo ya Bonde la Ufa yaibuka bingwa katika sekta ya kilimo, elimu, usalama, huku kaunti za ukanda huo zikipiga hatua kubwa katika utoaji huduma. Kwingineko kwenye spoti, kipigo kwa Man United cha mweka Ten Hag pabaya. Sio lazima tuangazie zaidi. Tatonesha vidonda. Pale juu kwenye ukurasa wa mbele wa Taifa Leo, visa mikasa KCPE KPSEA ikiendelea, watahiniwa 5 wafa, wengine wahamishwa, mwalimu akinaswa na karatasi feki. Na habari hii imeangaziwa kwenye ukurasa wa 2, wa 3 na wa 11 ndani ya gazeti la Taifa Leo. Kwingineko, Wapalestina waliouawa Gaza ni 8,000. Jeshi la Israeli laanza vita vya ardhini huku huduma zikikatizwa. Na hizo ndizo habari zilizopewa kipaumbele kwenye ukurasa wa mbele wa Taifa Leo hii Jumanne.
Let's have a look at the People Daily this morning. The headline there, ODM stands firm on cost of living. Matters bipartisan talks. The biggest partner in Azimio has welcomed talks to ease plan for citizens, but has demanded IMF and World Bank to be locked out, accusing the lenders of being part of Kenya's economic problems. And another headline there on the People Daily, royal visit set to boost coast tours. The region has witnessed increase in local and foreign arrivals as beach cleanup drive kicks off. And still on the People Daily, on the very lower strip, matters KEPSEA and KCPE. Over 2.6 million learners sit last KCPE second KEPSEA exams. And that is on page 6 and 7 of the Daily Nation. Of the People Daily this morning. And that is what we have on the People Daily this morning.
Right, and on the front page of the Star, taking on matters politics here, ODM rejects IMF, World Bank in bipartisan talks. And just a brief on that, Raila camp accuses the two of misadvising, quote unquote, the country, leading to current mess. They have that story on page 4 as well as on page 5. Below there, some pictorials of President Ruto was yesterday in Kikuyu Township Primary School. And on the top strip of the Star, close this probe, Ezekiel tells government as he awaits a decision. That's the top strip there. On the bottom strip, on page 17, matters voices by Kalonzo Musyoka, Wiper Party leader. Where are Kimathi's bones, Your Majesty? Some undertones of King Charles III visit and the whole state, the royal visit to the state. Other stories making it to the Star. Kenya oil imports deal, 210 billion Kenyan shillings paid out to Gulf companies since March. And the older Kenyans get, the more they fear aging, shows report. It is on page 2. A whole constant worry. Fred, I don't know how true this is. The older Kenyans get, the more they fear aging. That's according to a report.
Do I look scared? I'd want to check who did that survey.
It's on page 2. Yeah.
Okay, I'll look at it. I'm not scared at all.
Yeah. I think someone gets scared if they're at a certain age and you've put for yourself these timelines for doing things. That's when I think you get scared. But you're living life like Freddy. You just move.
Speaking as someone who has the birthday today.
I'm not scared. I've done myself well at 25.
Okay.
Yes.
I think we're done with Kenya.
That's
yes, let's cross over and see what's headlining in Uganda this morning. We're looking at the front page of the Daily Monitor. In Kampala, the big news this morning, U.S. to continue paying for AIDS drugs, says envoy. New U.S. ambassador to Uganda, William Pop, says the support to people living with HIV/AIDS will continue even when his government has major concerns with the anti-homosexuality law that came into force in May. That story is on page 5 of the Daily Monitor. Matters HIV once again making it to the front page of the Daily Monitor. Other big stories on the front page, there's a funeral service there. Church thanks government for gesture on Dr. Kiyingi. Other highlights, what Museveni rejection of Amin Institute means for us. And Amuria team now calls for dialogue with Besigye Group. There was a fire in Masaka School. The death toll is now at 4. And those are the big stories in Uganda this morning.
Let's have a look at what's headlining in Tanzania. And looking at the Citizen this morning, the top headline there, how lead leading banks posted 33% jump in profits, and a reduction in non-performing loans is among factors which helped the 13 first-tier banks operating in Tanzania to post a 33% increase in profits in the first 9 months of this year. Yes, in numbers there, that is what is shown. And still on the Citizen this morning, 7 charged with armed robbery and kidnapping. And let's take a look at what's on the lower strip of the Citizen this morning. Uniform teachers, standards in the pipeline, and government mulls loans for trainee pilots. And yes, that is what we have on the Citizen.
Tuangazie gazeti la Mwananchi, taarifa kuu pale, askofu akemea unafiki kwa rais. Mengi kwa hayo ni kuwa awataka wasaidizi wa Rais Samia Suluhu Hassan walio karibu zaidi kumshauri bila unafiki wala masilahi binafsi. Asikiliza kila mtu anapaswa kumsaidia kuleta maendeleo. Amgusa Lowassa na harakati za urais. Kinana aongoza viongozi wananchi mazishi ya Zelothe. Taarifa au vidokezo vingine katika gazeti la Mwananchi. Risasi 15 zilivyotua mwilini mwa bosi usalama wa taifa. Kwingineko, Daktari Tulia, kuna watu walitaka nisichaguliwe. Ni baadhi tu ya vidokezo katika gazeti la Mwananchi hii leo.
And as we wrap up this session looking at the dailies, let's take a look at the cartoons this morning. And the cartoon on the Daily Nation, page 23, talks about the royal visit once more. The red carpet there from the plane that carries the king and is sat there on a table with a queue of people with demands, reparations, apology, compensation. Just the kind of expectations that Kenyans have as we host the king and the queen for the next 4 days.
Oh, yes.
That's a cartoon on the Daily Nation.
On page 16 of the Standard, has to do with matters, the land grabbings happening in the country for a long time now. And there's that truck there, the whole long crane, and inside it, the common Mwananchi, one gentleman holding a title deed. And it looks like some blood spatter on that crane. The whole forceful evictions, probably a lot to it. That is on page 16 of the Standard. I'm trying to get the page 10 of People Daily. Do you have it? Talking about matters, the whole KCPE and KEPSEA. And Stano says, rather the whole satirical bit there, we wish all the KCPE and KEPSEA candidates all the best. And there are 2 candidates there, each saying, I am a winner, rather thinking out loud. And success to all KCPE and KEPSEA candidates, and also KCSE. And as I always say, kama ukusoma, ukusoma.
Okay. Yes, remember you can interact with us through our social media pages throughout this show as we continue this special coverage of the visit by King Charles III to Kenya. And just after the break, we'll be having a panel to discuss this crown diplomacy. Mr. Martin Nguru, international diplomacy expert, Honorable Kipruto Arap-Kirwa, former cabinet minister, Dr. Moses Onyango, international relations expert, and Dr. Edgar Githua, international affairs, diplomacy, and security analyst. You do not want to miss this conversation as we delve into just how meaningful this visit by King Charles III to Kenya will be. Interact with us on X at TV47 News and on Facebook, TV47 Kenya. You're watching Morning Cafe. Let's take a short break. Welcome back. You're watching Morning Cafe on TV 47. Now, King Charles III embarks this morning on a 4-day trip to Kenya. His first visit as monarch to a Commonwealth nation, where any comments he makes on Britain's colonial past will be closely scrutinized. Among other elements in a packed itinerary, King Charles is expected to tackle the more painful aspects of the UK's historic relationship with Kenya, namely the period of British rule, which ended in 1963. But first, let's take a look at this.
It will be a journey saturated in family history for Britain's new monarch. The King's trip also comes as Kenya prepares to celebrate 60 years of independence. The choice of Kenya for his first visit to a Commonwealth nation since becoming king in September has special resonance for the royal family. It was here in 1952 that King Charles's mother, the late Queen Elizabeth II, learnt of the death of her father, King George VI, marking the start of her historic 70-year reign. The visit also comes 40 years after Queen Elizabeth's state visit to Kenya in November 1983. King Charles has made 3 previous official visits to Kenya in 1971, 1978 and 1987, and both the King and Queen have also visited the country privately. History will hang heavily over the King's visit in a different way. Buckingham Palace has acknowledged that the royal visit would, and I quote, acknowledge the more painful aspects of the UK and Kenya's shared history. This remark is specific to Britain's brutal suppression of the Mau Mau rebellion from 1952 to 1960, which left tens of thousands of people dead and hundreds of thousands displaced. The British ambassador to Kenya, Neil Wiggins' statement on the matter was that an apology would be a difficult thing. As his first visit to a Commonwealth country and a former colony after his coronation, King Charles III's comments and conduct will be very closely watched by other former colonies and Commonwealth nations. The Commonwealth is a grouping of 56 countries, most of which are former British colonies, and including Australia, Canada and New Zealand. More than 12 Commonwealth nations still recognize the UK monarch as head of state. But some of them, including Jamaica and Belize, want to shed the monarchy as head of state, following Barbados' recent example in 2021. Britain's Daily Mail newspaper has billed Kenya as the first stop on King Charles's mission to save the Commonwealth. The president wrote on Twitter, or X, that the visit was an opportunity to enhance our collaboration in various areas of shared interest. For many Kenyans, however, this will be the first time to see the British monarchy live and direct. This is after witnessing the glamour and spectacle on TV of the marriages of Prince William and Prince Harry, as well as the death and funeral of Queen Elizabeth and the coronation of King Charles, and last but not least, the sensational episodes of the popular TV drama series The Crown. Victor Muyakane, TV 47.
And that report by my colleague Victor Muyakane paints a perfect background of our special coverage today on the visit to Kenya by King Charles III. Crown diplomacy. We're just about to embark on this discussion, and we're privileged to have in studio this morning gentlemen who do understand matters international relations and diplomacy. Let me introduce this gentleman on my left, Mr. Martin Nguru, international diplomacy expert. It's good to have you in studio. Karibu sana.
Thank you.
Next to Mr. Nguru, we do have Dr. Moses Onyango, international relations expert. Karibu sana to TV 47. Next, we have Honorable Kipruto Rapkirwa, not a new face to TV 47. It's good to have you on this panel. Karibu sana. He's a former cabinet minister.
Thank you.
And last but not least, Dr. Edgar Githua, international affairs, diplomacy and security analyst. Karibu sana. Now, let's start off with the manner in which the king has arrived. A lot of people would have imagined that there would be a lot of pomp and color at the airport, especially with the arrival of the king. Any leader of such stature would even expect the president himself to be at the airport to meet him. But we're seeing that the king arrived at night One, the president was not available to meet him at the airport. Instead, we had the Prime Cabinet Secretary, who was also in charge of Foreign and Diaspora Affairs, Musalia Mudavadi. Bonanguru, any questions there? Because on social media, it's a big talking point that the president was not available to welcome the king at the airport. We saw probably when Barack Obama arrived in Kenya as president, the president back then, Uhuru Kenyatta, was available for him.
Well, in my opinion, it's not a slight on the king's visit. The Honorable Musalia Mudavadi, in my view, is sits in the high echelons of power in Kenya. And so therefore, if the president is not available to meet the king at the airport, for one reason or the other, I don't think it is a slight on that visit. Okay. It is not whatsoever demeaning the king's visit.
Okay.
Yeah?
But Dr. Onyango, because it is a conversation that is quite rife on social media right now, have we lost on anything by the king arriving late at night? Because the expectation was that he would come during daytime and people would see this. There would be a lot of pomp and color from the airport all the way into the city. Or are we reading too much into his, much dimmed down arrival?
When state visits are planned, there's always a purpose to them. And I want to believe that the current regime in Kenya took power on the promise to those who suffered, especially the Mau Mau struggle, in the Mau Mau struggle, and also represented by the Deputy President of Kenya. They are quite aware of the facts that are sort of like of major concern to the citizens of Kenya. Therefore, I do not see the reception as a surprise, but a symbolic message of what this particular regime wants to represent to the king.
Okay. And what kind of message is that you would say that this administration wants to present to the king?
There's one third aspect that is supposed to be discussed deeply, the common history and the painful emergency, issues of 1952 to 1959. And this could actually inform the reception. Yes.
Because some people are even suggesting that probably that kind of arrival, the kind of reception, arriving at night when not many people are aware, because even his arrival was not as publicized, because most people would have expected he would arrive this morning. Do you think someone somewhere was trying to avoid something? Given the kind of demands that we're hearing.
Yes, just to pick from my teacher, I think we are reading a bit too much.
Yeah.
In the sense that a visit like this must have been arranged by the two countries, UK and Kenya, to know what time is arriving, and that's why the Honorable Musalia Mudavadi was at the airport. The second issue also, while we have common history with them, not many of us are aware of the impact of colonialism. Many of us, about 95%, was born after independence. In fact, those who are here, like Martin Nguru and I, maybe on the tail end, we are just 5% of the remaining population of those who had the impact of colonial era, and those who saw the transition from the colonial era in 1963 to the new era, although personally I was only 6 years old. But still, I felt it, I saw it, and the fears that used to pervade the atmosphere before independence were heavy. Just like what my panelist colleague here said, the Mau Mau issue was heavy to the minds of many Kenyans, and it was something that was so divisive that many of us who were young, we were told to avoid some of our neighbors because they were feared to be Mau Mau, just because of the name of the tribe they come from. Those are some of the serious issues that we as a nation, we must be able to engage and come to terms with it and move on.
Okay. And we will discuss a lot to do with the relationship between Kenya and Britain, which has been and had very many different phases. Much talked about was the colonial phase, where a lot has been said about it. Even the many demands and the many expectations emanate from that time when Britain was Kenya's colonial master. But before that, let's take a look at what happened immediately after independence and the kind of relationship that Kenya had with Britain. And I was reading a journal here by Poppy Cullen, and it's titled, let me just get it clear, and it talks about what happened immediately after independence. The journal is titled The Journal of Imperial and Commonwealth History. It talks about the level of dependency that Kenya had still on its colonial master, that independence was supposed to create that divide between a former colonial master and a newly freed country. But that did not happen. A lot can be said about that. The way we stack a difference between Kenya's colonial history and Kenya after independence, immediately after independence.
Fred?
Yes.
Can I make a correction?
Yes, go ahead.
The correction I want to make is that the name ought to read the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. But for purposes of today, let's call it Britain.
Okay.
Isn't it?
Okay.
Yes.
Yes, there's that great history about it.
Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland.
And we'll continue enjoying a lot of this.
But for purposes of today, let's just refer to it as Britain or probably UK.
Okay.
UK.
Fine?
Yes.
Fine. Go ahead.
Thanks for your question. Yeah, you're right. When Kenya attained independence, and not only Kenya but many African countries from their colonial masters, the issue of dependency was bound to happen. Because remember, during colonialism, they had trained Africans to be administrators. They had trained Africans to take up some of these roles, like especially Britain in Kenya and in Uganda utilized something called indirect rule. So they utilized certain ethnic groups and certain cadres of Africans to help them rule because of the language barrier. So when it was time for independence, they hand over power to this elite clique who had been helping them to administer. And that was purposely done because then they were going to keep tabs, they were going to keep strings attached with these people who had actually risen through them. So for the foreseeable few years after independence, our structures, even our administrators, our first independence cabinet, you even have, whites, in that cabinet. And for a long, long time, certain key areas had to be run by the British, because they're the ones who had the knowledge. And that created that dependency syndrome that we keep on talking about. Because that was what we had inherited, their education system, their administration system. Theirs was the only thing that we knew and how to govern. So part of their colonial legacy was we're preparing Africans to be independent, we're preparing Africans to govern themselves. But what governance style did we inherit from them? What they taught us.
Okay.
So for the longest time, we didn't have anything else to fall back on. That was the only thing that we had to really depend on them, even for many structures and for many things, many institutions. Yeah.
And we'll come back to you, but Nguru, this dependency, was it in any way as a result of the Lancaster process that gave us our constitution? Because a lot has been said that the constitution that we had as a direct result of the Lancaster process was one that was handed to us, and we had to make do with it. It was not necessarily intended to resolve the issues that you are looking to resolve as an independent country?
The Lancaster House Conference, I happen to have been at the department, the Institute of Diplomacy and International Studies, when the late Gigi Karaoke was writing his PhD thesis, and he wrote it on the process, the Lancaster House process. Because I think he was the secretary then? Yeah, of Kanu or something. And he has written a very nice thesis, PhD thesis. In his late years, I think he was 77. And he has given a very nice background to it, to what happened and so on. And Lancaster House, I would say, was, I am not a historian, I am a diplomatist. Probably this is best, could best be answered by a historian. But in my recollection, the Lancaster House Conference was a process that in which Kenyans, or the representatives of Kenya, participated. And it was not something that was pushed down their throats.
Okay.
It was a process that I think was a consensus by those that participated in it.
Okay. Yet there are those who believe that for our first constitution as a country, we borrowed too heavily from the British system, and hence the kind of problems that we faced later on. Do you agree with that analysis that this dependency was because of that? Yes.
I would not want to agree with that. Why? Because we were not, Kenya was not forced by anybody, in my own recollection, to adopt the first constitution. It was a constitution that was discussed, debated, and agreed upon.
Okay. And we'll come back to continue with this conversation because we are due for a break. It's already 7 a.m. Dr. Moses, when we come back, we'll talk to you exactly on this issue about Kenya's dependency on its immediate former colonial masters immediately after independence. You're watching Morning Cafe. Continue interacting with us on our social media pages at TV47 News on X, TV47 Kenya on Facebook, as we continue with our special coverage on the visit by King Charles III to Kenya.
It includes the family structure, it includes religion, it includes constitutionalism and government. So government and constitutionalism at the Lancaster House was just one aspect. But some of the historical intrusions were actually planted through education system, religion, and the family structure, to the extent that the Kenyan people embraced most of the structures, cultures, and ideas of the English. I wouldn't want to call them the Welsh or the Scot, but more particularly the English. To the extent that when they inherited this particular institutional structures, including ideas, that became the sustenance of dependency. Therefore, the question is, was the Constitution forced on us, or was it, were we taking it willingly? I would like to make a conclusion based on what I have said, that it was indirectly forced on us through ideological manipulation, because the people who went to Lancaster House were actually singing the songs and the interests of the British people.
Okay.
Yes.
Bonakira, do you agree with that? If the resultant document from the Lancaster Conference had a huge impact on how Kenya interacted with the British after independence?
Yes, but we need to go back to the 70 years under colonial rule. Remember, all the states, whether it is Ghana or Kenya, they were meant to be sources for raw materials. And therefore, the lunatic express that entered the hinterland from Mombasa was meant to carry away most of the raw materials to be manufactured there for purposes of enhancing their economies. And therefore, that was the structure that was created. And immediately after independence, we could not stop that overnight. Remember, Great Britain was the major destination for many of our goods, whether it's coffee, whether it's tea, or any other product that was meant for export. It is recently that we have increasingly moved away from Great Britain to other destinations. Look at Africa in totality. We are still, our business is still less than 25% intra-Africa trade. Most of our trade is with the former colonial masters, and some of the countries are still dependent. So that dependency was not just a product of the Constitution alone. It was the product of history, the way Dr. Onyango said. It was also a product of what I call tripartite curse. Well, the first curse is the issue of complacency by the elite that took over from Britain. The second curse is the issue of corruption. The third curse is the issue of external influence, where the external influencers try to manipulate affairs of the nation, as it is the case now in West Africa and many other countries. That was the case in Kenya. But there is a silver lining on it. Remember the SFT lands that we managed to purchase, the 1 million acres. It was midwifed through the loan that was syndicated between us and Britain. And that's why we were able to settle our people, unlike the case in Zimbabwe, which was bungled by the fact that Britain was not as willing as they were willing in Kenya. Look also at the transition from what we call the monarch and the government of the day because of our complacency. Remember in 1963, Mzee Kenyatta was prime minister. 1 year later, he became president, therefore making himself head of state and head of government. While in Britain, it is separated. The king is head of state, and the prime minister is head of government. That is the first cause I was telling you, complacency by the elite, which is still a serious disease in Africa today, and in Kenya in particular. So these are some of the challenges. We cannot blame them enough because some of the problems are ours. I remember the Lancaster Conference was a negotiated document between KADU and KANU, where KANU was talking of unitary government and KADU was talking of regional systems akin to what we have now in devolution, but slightly more structured along the former provinces. So these are some of the problems that we visited on ourselves because the ruling elite wanted to be like the old fellows, our colonial masters. So we are new masters in black skins, but still the mentality was the same, the way Dr. Onyango said. Because they had been educated, they believed the only way you can take over is to take over as the new king, as the new president or prime minister, and therefore you visit a lot of mayhem on your people.
Yes. And
so we cannot blame them, we blame ourselves.
Okay. Yet Britain may have felt a bit responsible for what had happened in Kenya, especially given the kind of relationship they had with the Mau Mau agitation towards the tail end of the colonial period. Do you think that it's Britain that because they felt responsible, they needed to extend their watch over this young country?
Okay, yeah, thanks for your question, Fred. I don't think it is that they felt responsible. Mheshimiwa has captured it rightly. Africa in general, and Kenya in particular, was a source for raw materials. And then remember, Kenya was a settler colony. Very nice climate, very fertile arable land for them to, grow their coffee, grow their tea. Remember when they're coming into Kenya from 1895, we're coming on the backdrop of the Industrial Revolution. So they need raw materials, cotton. Big industries are booming in Europe, and they're looking for settler colonies. They're looking for, there was a lot of, during the Agrarian Revolution and the Industrial Revolution, very many people lost their jobs in Britain. Why? Because they had automated their industries. So some people are, work that could be done in a factory by 10 people, one machine replaced people. So that agitation within Britain forced them to try and look for a place to send this agitated population. So you'd be told we have a colony in Kenya, in East Africa then, there's a colony in East Africa, you can go there, and then overnight, people who are factory workers came into Kenya and became colonial clerks. They have power, they have land. So the Kenyan construct, the Kenyan colony, was also an outlet for the internal pressure that was in Britain at that particular point. So they did not feel, it was not a thing of responsibility that made them stay on into the country. I want to call it, their settler colony, their settlers were already here. We have a big population in Nanyuki and certain places. So it was in their interest to leave leaders who would protect their interests. So you leave leaders who are going to protect your interests, like Mheshimiwa and the other panelists have said, the raw materials are still going to Britain. Kenya has no other alternative. We haven't yet created any links with other in the global community of nations. So we still rely on Britain to buy our raw materials. We still buy their Land Rovers. And for the longest time until the first government stabilized, at least Mzee Kenyatta's cabinet stabilized, Britain had a lot of sway in our governance structure and everything that was happening.
So it was more about a reluctance to let go than a feeling or a sense of responsibility over the new nation. Do you agree that probably that has persisted? We are marking 60 years since independence, but what we may call a reluctance to let go by the British, do you still feel we have some of that today, Bwana Nguru?
One would have to look at longer than that. Longer than that, as in probably a century ago, when we had British missionaries coming to Kenya, establishing themselves in Kenya. And like they say, the Bible preceded the flag, or the flag followed the Bible. We also have to look at the explorers, that history, when people like Speke and Barton, what they call that, came and said they discovered, I don't know, Mount Kenya, Lake Victoria, and so on. And later on, the Berlin Conference of 1884, 1885, or what we call the Partition of Africa, or the Scrabble for Africa, where the European countries, Britain, we agreed to call it Britain. Isn't it?
Yes.
I mean,
for purposes of this discussion, yes.
It's too mouthful. Britain, France, Belgium, you know, Germans and so on. They met in Berlin and carved out Africa amongst themselves. And they carved it, I think, based on where they had gone. Their missionaries had gone, their explorers had gone. And so the history goes back. I would say that the two countries, Kenya and Britain, have had a very long history of common front of relations. You know, common interests, I would say.
But
like my
if we may draw parallels with what you're seeing probably in West Africa, where France was a colonial master, and the impression is that they appear to have persisted more in their sense of reluctance to let go, especially in countries like Niger, where we recently had a coup, and they're still struggling on whether or not the French military should leave, and chasing away the ambassador. Dr. Onyango, drawing a parallel between what is happening with the former French colonies in West Africa and how the British has behaved in as far as Kenya is concerned, what is your assessment of that?
Before Dr. Onyango answers that,
yes,
I'd like to say that the British had a different way of governance than the French. The French used assimilation. We call it assimilation. But the British did not use that model.
Go ahead.
Thank you for that. I would like to start by looking at your question of reluctance to go, and then I'll look at Britain and France. First, I would like to begin by saying that states relate on the basis of power and security. And their national interests, primary national interest, is to protect their national security. And national security is fed by economic power, economic resources. Therefore, states go out there to look for economic resources to remain as much powerful as they can. Now, was Britain reluctant to let go of Kenya? We have to look at the circumstances under which Britain left Kenya indirectly. Of course, they stayed ideologically, and they remain holding the economic stronghold. But the circumstances were based on the Second World War, whereby Britain was actually devastated economically, and United States came to the rescue of most of these European countries that were devastated by war. And we remember the Marshall Plan that was actually given by United States to develop the economies of European countries that had been devastated by war. Therefore, one of the conditions that Britain was given by United States was to let go of their colonies. So they reluctantly left Kenya, but not necessarily wanting because of reasons of the economic interest that they still had in Kenya. Now, to come to how the different countries between Britain and France relate with their former colonies is based on what Mwalimu has said here, is that both had different ways of governance. Britain used the indirect rule, and France simulation. But both countries had one goal: protection of their national interests and exploitation of economic resources of their colonies and former colonies.
Okay, would you say that the behavior by Britain in how it's conducting itself in relation to its former colonies has been better in some way as compared to, we're using the example of France because of what has happened in the recent past, especially in West Africa?
Yeah, there are two evils. So at times to measure which one is more evil than the other is a very thin line to slice. Look at the British, because the BAMBA was the tail end. But remember, the 10-year Nandi resistance against the British which means they were coming in with a lot of force because they wanted to occupy and ensure that they invest, and that investment goes back to the homeland. This therefore means they were so determined. Fast forward, the Second World War. Those who came back from the Second World War in various parts of the world were given the White Islands. And that's why Kenya Institute of Management was started in Kericho in 1952, because it became now a center to teach the soldiers who had come from the war. Now all of a sudden they own farms and they don't have any basic knowledge of accounts. So, and they had a lot of cheap labor from the Africans. So all those tea estates and other investments that were done, that is how Kenya Institute of Management came into being, for purposes of exploiting the Africans. And therefore, then fast forward, the blue squatter system that pervaded the atmosphere right from Kidhunguri all the way to Uasin Gishu, where the indigenous people were told the only way you can work with the Mzungu is to be able to provide certain labor or pay certain taxes. So the rich Kikuyus in Kidhunguri initially were trying to resist. So they were selling their goats because they did not want to work for them until the goats got finished. So they were forced to work. And therefore, when the goats got finished, now the Mzungu infused his own investment within the land. In Uasin Gishu and other parts of the North Rift, we were reducing the number of animals you could keep as a farmer from 50 to 26 to 16 to 8 and eventually to 4. That is what caused the exodus of most of the Nandis to Tanzania, to Uganda, West Pokot, Masailand, and some of them close to Laikipia for purposes of trying to get dowry for their sons. Because they realized for us we pay 5 cows. So if you are only keeping 4 cows and we have 4 sons, one son will marry, the rest of them will perish without marrying. These are some of the injustices that were visited on Kenya. But we don't want to spend a lot of time there. Let us think of how do we reparate our people. Because the new rich in Kenya today are keen on taking over these White Islands, like the tea estates, so that it is impossible to trace the injustices meted on us by the British, because one of our sons has bought 2,000 acres, 10,000 acres of land in Kericho, Nandi Hills, or any other part of the country, or even here in Kiambu.
And even as we look to the future, of course, we cannot ignore this past that, as you said, not many Kenyans have a proper understanding of this. A lot has been talked about the Mau Mau agitation for independence period, which was about 10 years or so between 1952 to 1962, around there. But a lot had happened before that, and the other gentlemen have made reference to that. And even the kind of anecdotes and stories that Honorable Kiro is giving us. Not much of that has been documented. In as far as our history with Britain, a lot of this knowledge is not out there, apart from the Mau Mau bit.
It's true.
Yes.
Yeah, you're right, Fred. And the problem is, we say in academia we talk about he who controls the narrative. He controls the history and controls all that. And then here you have a case where Africans who are not as educated. Our system, we had our informal education system where we talked, we passed down stories. We were not very good archivists. We did not archive a lot of our information. You're right, we will never know the extent of the exploitation that occurred in the country, before 1952. We know the 1952 to 1960 period because of the gravity and the atrocities and just, the Mau Mau uprising and the reaction that occurred. But you do not know of the many injustices that might have occurred prior. And in previous years when, number one, communities were, placed far from each other, the Maasai is being made to give out their land in those agreements where they gave out their lands and they were taken into settlement places. The Nandi community being moved from the highlands, the Kikuyus and all that, the Mijikendas at the coast. So there are a lot of these atrocities that occurred, and some are barely documented. Some probably live in the memories of our great-grandfathers and our grandfathers, like what Mheshimiwa was talking about. But other than that, going forward, because I also want to be progressive I want to be progressive and I want to look forward. Instead of really focusing on that dark history, how about Kenyans start the conversation of how can we
make our ties better by, number one, having the British assist where they can. In some of these areas where Kenyans feel injustices were committed and they are documented. How about almost like a CSR project? How about the British just stepping in and helping? And then also for Kenyans, also not to hold on too much to that dark past, because I don't know what much can be accomplished. I do not see anything getting accomplished by people going out there and agitating and screaming. And for me, I watched news the other day and I realized that certain communities, as I was talking about the injustices and talking about them at the time when the king is visiting, I was more for, can this be done, instead of it being done outside there as a PR exercise, why not quietly engage the British government and tell them these are what our communities are saying? Can we resolve this quietly through track 2 diplomacy, quietly behind closed doors? Because when you make it an outside conversation, outside there, to what extent can we hold them accountable?
Yet we cannot ignore this conversation about our history and to what extent and who else was affected, Mwalimu Nguru, because much has been said about Mau Mau. And when demands for reparation and so many other things and compensation and apology is talked about, it is in reference to the Mau Mau. Yet a lot of other communities were affected in different ways by the colonial period. And it points to the role that literature plays in diplomacy and in all these things, because even in British literature, not much is said about their involvement as a colonial power over Kenya. If we fail from our end to document some of these things, even in our own literature, won't we be missing out on something? Are we intentionally blacking out a part of history, even as we look to the future?
Well, in my mind, there's a lot of history that, like Mheshimiwa Ambassador said, which is undocumented, but it has been told by generations, yeah? Like, we would even talk of Samoei Arab, Koitalel Arab Samoei, who was hanged by the British in, I think, 1920s or something.
1919.
1919?
No, 1905.
1905.
October 19th, yeah.
Yes, I have read an article of a lady who said she was one of his ambassadors, messengers. And she's, I think her name was Kaboon. Mama Kaboon, who said that she even witnessed his persecution. Let me call it persecution, including some Kikuyu chiefs who were being threatened. They would be held from their legs onto waterfalls. They would be told to sign some documents that they have handed over, I don't know, their lands to the British. You know, so there was a lot of that. But in my mind, I don't think we need to dwell so much into that past. Yeah? Let's live and let go. It happened, yes it did. But you cannot undo it.
Okay.
The British, I would say, owe Kenya some form of reparation or some form of compensation or some form of apology. But I am not aware of the first government by Jomo Kenyatta or by Daniel Arap Moi or by Mwai Kibaki or by Uhuru Kenyatta or the current government having ever sought for either an apology or compensation.
Okay.
I think the Kenyan people, the Kenyan government wants the British to give that apology voluntarily. But I would appreciate if they can do that.
Yeah. Dr. Nyango, there's a general feeling that we need to move on from this, looking back at our history, calling it a dark history. But do you agree with that?
Yes, I agree with that. I would like to begin by quoting Nelson Mandela after being incarcerated for many years. He was asked that, don't you feel bitter about what happened to you? And he responded that he feels bitter, but as a human being after being released, he's looking at his lifespan on earth and he's thinking, what can he do within that short period while he's living on earth? And he said he's going to forgive and move on and do what he could within that particular time he has on earth. Now, for Kenya, there are about 5 basic functions of government: extractive, distributive, regulative, we have symbolic, and emergency responses. And your question falls within the symbolism. Any nation worth being called a nation state has to have symbolism of unity, what unites them, and it's that history that gives people the sense of belonging. Now, we have been having a shortfall in terms of pursuing that path of symbolism. Now, if you look at the British history in Kenya and the Kenyan history, the gallant soldiers of the British in the First World War, Second World War, have beautiful grave cemeteries that are always having nice lawn mowns, beautiful flowers laid. But if you look at many Kenyans who perished during the British colonial rule, some of them, especially during the emergency, the bones were being picked from peat latrines, forests, and collected by the British government pathologists then. And that pathologist, when the British left Kenya, handed those bones to the Kenya government. And those bones are stored at the Kenya Museum. And they have never been buried to rest in peace since independence, yet we have a Kenya government. What I would urge is that part of the reparation and restoration of dignity is to speak to the king, because at that time it is his mother who was the head of government when during emergency. So any state is organized, and therefore all the atrocities that were committed against the Kenyan people, the British know what they did. And people talk about Dedan Kimathi, that they don't know where Dedan Kimathi's remains are. They should ask the king, King Charles, to intervene, because the state, the British government knows where those bones are. They are the ones who hanged him, so they know where he is. So I don't understand this mystery of not knowing where he is. And also, I don't understand why our Kenyan people, the heroes, are still kept in the museum instead of being given a peaceful burial. So to begin with the symbolism, apart from the other state functions, we need to be truthful to power and give our people a peaceful rest.
Okay. And it speaks to the issue of closure in Kenya's, on Kenya's end post-independence. Because our identity as a country and our DNA, whatever or what we would describe ourselves as, we would appear even amongst our neighbors to be missing out on a lot. A Kenyan identity, even the language. Yes, we pride ourselves on speaking perhaps better English than the rest, but can we really say that is our identity? Tanzania has its own identity with Ujamaa and other things. Kenya has been unable to some extent, to completely delink itself from the British. Our mannerisms, our military, the manner in which we do so many things. And I would quote a perfect example, the funeral of the founding father of the nation, the Jomo Kenyatta, that the British were contacted at least 10 years before to assist in conducting that funeral. And they were very involved. Even some British media carried rumors that the gun carriage that carried the body of the late president was the same one that carried the body of the late Prime Minister Winston Churchill. To some extent, as a country, we've missed out on a lot in terms of identifying ourselves as a nation and ensuring that we have an identifiable character out there. 60 years on.
Well, it's interesting because if somebody imagined Kenyatta would die 10 years before, then the late Charles Njonjo would have caught up with him. Because
It's true.
I remember he issued a statement that anybody canvassing, imagining the death of the president will be doing so at his own peril. And that was the headline news those days. But of course, people knew Kenyatta was mortal, like all of us. And we had a lot of some kind of carryover history. Remember when the Air Force was started in 1968, the first Air Force commander was from the British Army, and so forth. And of course, some of the ministers, the way my colleague said earlier, were from some were Boers, like the late Mackenzie, and some influential people in this regime were from Britain. So that history you cannot run away from. But fundamentally, we need to ask ourselves and interrogate that. Yes, the writers of history, like what I said about the Nandi Rebellion, was written by British, and that information is there. But of course, through the lenses of the British. And therefore, we need to challenge our historians. I'm not an historian myself, but I like reading history because it informs me about the past. To write through the lenses of the African people. At least Ngugi wa Thiong'o tried, but was captured at some stage. Unlike Chinua Achebe, was been able to give the social narrative of the Nigerian people in so many aspects. We need to tell our intellectuals to spend more time writing about the history of our people. And also we need to disabuse the politicians, those in power, that all these issues of having companies in Dubai, buying parastatals, buying banks, and also perhaps going to buy some of those tea estates in Kericho and in Nandi is not an answer to reparation. We are telling the British to give us reparation, but we should tell the administration of the day to give us reparation by midwifing a process that the tea estates in Kericho, the tea estates in Nandi, the tea estates in Limuru that are yet to be owned by indigenous people, we have a transition, you midwife through even a cooperative system, like the teachers cooperative and other cooperatives, so that people own part of the cake. You have tea on top, but the soil belongs to the people of Kiambu. You have tea on top, but the soil belongs to the people of Kericho and Bomet, and the people of Nandi, and so forth. So these are some of the things. We may be blaming the British, but we are not scrutinizing and interrogating our own leaders here in Kenya. Because if we don't watch, in the next 10 years or so, we are likely to have a skewed ownership of some of these so-called international owned properties owned by our own sons, and therefore you cannot fight them because you will say it's one of our own. So the new rich in town, they need to be informed that the young generation, like the way unemployment was blossoming or was ballooning in Britain, is ballooning in Kenya.
Isn't this something that we borrowed directly from the British, where a few people own a lot of the property at the expense of the rest of society, meaning that to a huge extent we've not been able to distinguish ourselves in behavior from how the British governed and owned property?
No, you're right, Fred. I think that, and that's why we had philosophers, political scientists like Karl Marx, who talked about how a small group, elite, dominate and control the masses. The whole idea behind capitalism. And that was the main fight between KANU and KADU. For KANU, because it had elite whose parents and whose fathers and whose family had been entrenched and they were colonial collaborators, They wanted power to be given to an elite few and a central government that will control the resources of the country. KADU, on the other hand, thought about Majimboism, thought about federalism. Let's distribute this cake and power to the entire country. So that elite construct, and it continues in most governments. You have a small clique of elite who are always trying to control the majority. And that's where actually the dependency syndrome comes from, where the rich control the poor by keeping them poor to exploit them, give them peanuts, handouts, so that they continue being dependent and obedient. So Kenya inherited this system from Britain. The elite, the children of the home guards, the children of the senior chiefs, the children of the collaborators realized, let us inherit this country and perpetuate controlling these resources. And that's one of the problems that the country continues to have. So back to what my colleagues are talking about, how do we involve Kenya? And especially coming back to your question of identity. Creating that Kenyan identity will only occur when we get Kenyan leaders who decide to allow everybody else to be part of the process without any backhand undercover deals. Let me just fall back to what Mheshimiwa was talking about. If, for example, those Kericho tea estates are being sold, why don't you make it a transparent affair? It is being sold, this company is exiting, these are the shares it is selling, float them, give everybody an equal opportunity. I know economists can do it, I'm not an economist. They can work out how do we get the masses to be part of this process. Then Kenyans will become proud of being part of Kenya. And that's how we create an identity.
Okay.
But currently, you have this construct where some Kenyans feel they are not part of the system because they say Kenya belongs, ni inchi iko na wenyewe. That's a Swahili phrase.
Yes.
Yeah, the country belongs, it has its owners.
Yes, Dr. Onyango.
Yes, I just wanted to add that trickle-down economic system is good, but it doesn't work where there's immorality, where there's no moral code. So replacing a white capitalist with an African capitalist is not the solution. The solution is to find an economic system that works for the country, where there's social welfare. The state minds about this greedy capitalist and intervenes in terms of redistribution of resources to those who are in need, to support those who are disadvantaged in society. So capitalism is okay. It's good to have a system where those who can actually achieve maximum capacity based on their capability to be given a chance to do so. But there has to be a moral code that governs that greed.
But yet we can see, Mwalimu Nguru, to some extent this conversation is there. During the last campaigns, we had a lot about dynasties and the hustler. And when we talk about dynasties, it was in a comparison to the British equivalent of the aristocracy. Do you think that that conversation at the Kenyan level is genuine? That we are really looking to change how we run our issues and the link from what we learned from the British?
I want to probably add on to what Dr. Onyango has said. And we need not go far. Examples are very close. What happened in Uganda during Idi Amin's time? He chased away all the Asians, Indians and whatever, and he was handing over factories to people that, hii ni yako, this one is yours. What happened in Zimbabwe? The late president, Mugabe, was handing out farms to people, indigenous people, Zimbabweans. Then later, after that, the economy is collapsed. Uganda's economy collapsed. The Zimbabwean economy collapsed because these people were not capable of managing those factories, those farms, those everything. Now, the issue of dynasty in Kenya, I don't think that was a good, and to be very sincere, that was, I think, something that was being said to garner votes. I mean, I'm going to say this on public TV. I think in Kenya, we do not have dynasty.
So the conversation
we may have the haves and the have-nots.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, let me say the Kenyatta family. Yeah, which produced the first president and the third president. But that's not a dynasty. Isn't that a dynasty, really?
But was it an attempt to actually delink from the British equivalent, the aristocracy, that we want the way we govern our issues to be different from the way they do it there?
I think it was a product of fertile imagination of some individuals who connived to construct some theory that was sellable to the people of Kenya, knowing their vulnerability. Otherwise, they did not believe the story themselves. But they rang on our ears enough times until we believed the story. And yet they themselves did not believe the story. That's why what is happening now is different from what was being promised at that particular time. It is unfortunate as it is a reality today in Kenya. And it may be again like that. Because like what Dr. Aria was saying, they just provide some dolls for each one of us to be happy around election time. After elections, it's business as usual. The big boys in town will appropriate to themselves and ensure that they insulate themselves, and they have no capacity to question those who came before them. Because if you call the Kenyatta family, the Moi family, and to the extent the Raila family dynasties, then when you acquire that position, yourself, you become a dynasty de facto. It is going to be an endless game. What we need to do is to interrogate the issues afflicting our society and say, yes, this is the way we should do it. The problem in Zimbabwe, the way Mwalimu Nguru has said, and also Uganda, is that the midwife was a poor handler of the baby. Otherwise, if the midwife was good, the baby should have survived to full term and also grow to be a man or a woman. So what we need to do is to look for good midwives for this particular process to be complete. I mean, did a measure of many bad things, but when he was teaching us diplomacy, he told us the building in New York, it is Amin who built it, 12 floors, that now is holding many embassies, and during crisis, Uganda was surviving, many embassies abroad were surviving because of that building. He did one good thing. He meant well, but he was not trained as in midwifery. So
can that midwifery process take 60 years plus, that we could still be in that process, probably just took a little longer for ourselves, as opposed to the rushed version in Uganda or Zimbabwe?
Because you see the hunters, or the soldiers partake in the stolen property. And you see, once you partake in the stolen property, you are equally guilty, and therefore you will not be a good midwife. What we just need to do is somebody will bring a revolution like akin to the one of Jerry Rawlings. He died a poor man, but he changed Ghana.
Okay. Yeah. And Dr. Moses, back to that issue of identity, because our neighbors, in the manner they conduct themselves, Tanzania, is very different from us. They had this Ujamaa ideology from back in the day, and they sustained it probably to different levels of success. Yet Kenya, we're still struggling on which direction we should take as a country. We do not even agree on the system of governance we have, be it presidential, parliamentary. We are not even sure what kind of mongrel we are working with. That issue of identity is still alive today. We are lost in the woods.
Yes, I would like to start by commending Mwalimu Julius Nyerere. He was a critical thinker. And the way he did it was first, because a culture of a country is a social product. And the agents of socializations are many: family, schools, peers, institutions. And the first thing that Mwalimu Julius Nyerere did was to engineer the socialization process in Tanzania to make Tanzania think like one and have a Tanzanian identity. And he got rid of ethnic identities by introducing a language, the Swahili, and promoting it. In fact, when you go to Tanzania, you'll find almost 99% of Tanzanians are literate. They can sit down and read a newspaper written in Swahili. Okay? We don't have that in Kenya. So in Kenya, we never engineered, our founding fathers never engineered any social identity to be called Kenyan. What they engineered was what they inherited from the British, that is of divide and rule. When you take government, hold it for your ethnic group and distribute a few crumbs to other ethnic groups, and let all those who are not in government look up to you. And that is a British system that was handed to the Kenyan founding fathers, and they continued with it. And let me also add that there are two things, concepts, that are very critical in development. Imitation and emulation, and they are completely different. You can imitate your master, but that does not mean you are a critical thinker. You do what your master wants you to do very well, the way you can train a dog to jump up and it jumps, down, sit, and it does. And I think in Kenya, our founding fathers to today, leadership, are doing it very well.
Imitation.
Imitation. Now, what Mwalimu Julius Nyerere did, he studied in Scotland. He didn't go back like Kamuzu Banda and behave like the Scots, and both of them studied in Scotland. Kamuzu Banda imitated the Scots very well by wearing a three-piece suit even at a hot, where he would go to Egypt, 53 degrees Celsius, and he's still in a suit because a gentleman has to be a gentleman. Now, that is imitation. Now, Mwalimu Julius Nyerere went through the same education system, went back to the country, and went with education and emulated, became innovative, and therefore created a Tanzanian identity. And I think we need more emulators, innovators, entrepreneurs in the Kenyan system so that we can make Kenya grow and define a Kenyan identity. Okay. Kenya is a great country with great educated people, resourceful people. We are exporting human resource. Botswana, Namibia, across the globe you find Kenyans. But why is it that we are not doing it right here? Okay. Why is the political system in Kenya structured in a way that we are divided rather than being united and growing together?
And Dr. Githo, when it comes to issues of identity, we've seen quite some superficial, if I may call it that, attempts at delinking or trying to distinguish ourselves from the British in mannerisms, even in the way of dressing. As Dr. Onyango mentioned, our way of wearing suits even in hot weather. It reminds me of even in the judiciary, we still wear the same as the British, including the headgear that is now a requirement, especially during the admission to the bar of our lawyers. We saw an attempt when Dr. Willie Mutunga was a CJ, trying to move away from that, but very first immediately he left, they quickly went back to that. Isn't that a form of dependency?
It is. We are victims. I would say Kenya and many African countries and many third world countries are victims of cultural imperialism. Our culture has been superseded and has been downgraded and oppressed by more superior cultures. And dependency, there's a scholar called Antonio Gramsci who talked about whoever controls ideas, whoever controls the narratives and ideas rules international relations. And that is where Africa and Kenya got left behind. We came late into history and found the history books written for us. What education systems have we gone through? We have gone through education systems that were handed down to us. If you ask Dr. Onyango, Mwalimu Nguru, even Mheshimiwa here, try publishing in academia. they are gatekeepers. When Africans try to publish, we have to jump through hoops before our academic work is accepted in those elite journals out there, because they are serious gatekeepers. We once had a professor, a distinguished professor of governance, Nick Cheeseman, who came one day at USIU University, and he taught us about how to publish. And he admitted that there are serious gatekeepers in the world of academia. Now, on the basis of that alone, it means even what our culture tries to put out there still gets downgraded in the international world of academia. And so in studies, we talk about post-colonialism and post-structuralism, the reformation of even just the education systems that we go through. So being innovative, I like what Dr. Onyango has talked about, that emulation. How about Kenya deciding, the Kenyan education system deciding that part of our curriculum right from when our children are small, we will have a course, what is being a Kenyan?
Yeah.
What makes you Kenyan? Yeah. What are these characteristics that make us uniquely Kenyan? And having our children grow up with that, and like the Utamaduni Day we had the other day, which was quite impressive, because at least we were going back trying to showcase what our cultures have. But largely, Fred, we are victims of cultural imperialism, where even our young people, and when I teach at university, I challenge my students and ask them, what do you prefer watching when you go back at home? Do you watch Afro cinema, or do you put on Netflix? And the majority tell me, I take the remote and quickly go to Netflix. Why? I like those Western movies, I like that Western culture. And so over time, that cultural imperialism is perpetuated. So Africa as a whole, and Kenya in particular, you end up finding that our identity gets lost. Some years ago when I was a bit young, Kenya, and especially the Kenyan ladies, there was an attempt to come up with a national dress. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, I think for Mheshimiwa, and I think all of us, we were of age. I think I'm the youngest in this group. Yeah. I want to pride myself being the youngest here. There was a certain skirt that was released that a lot of ladies bought. But knowing their character, soon enough, nearly all the ladies had that skirt. Then people started calling it Kenya uniform. And on the virtue of that, instead of it being embraced positively, all the ladies dumped those skirts in their wardrobes, in their closets, because they did not want to look like each other. So even an attempt at getting a Kenyan dress, because if you ask foreigners, what is the Kenyan dress? They will tell you about the Masai shuka. That is what they think identifies as Kenyans. President Uhuru used to have this armband that I liked. It trended for a while, but unless some of those things are picked and Kenyans identify and say it's good to have that armband, it's good to have different things from different cultures, we are going to continue being victims of this cultural imperialism, where our culture has been oppressed and downgraded as a second-class culture, and we prefer Western culture.
Mwalimu Nguru, where does this leave us in diplomacy? And I think Dr. Onyango made a mention of this, international relations. The fact that we appear more as an extension of Britain in our mannerisms and behaviors, and a clear lack of an identifiable character. When it comes to diplomacy and international relations, does it leave us at a weaker position?
One, I want to agree with my young brother here. He has made some very important remarks of our background. Now, where does that leave us in Kenya? Now, one has to look at the historical background between Kenya and Britain, or UK. And these two countries have historical, I would call them historical relationships that date back many centuries ago. And Kenya was a British colony, that's first, and we borrowed a lot from them, and we shall continue for a really long time to ape or to copy the British. One would say diplomacy is informed by various factors. One of them is the history. And the British having colonized Kenya, therefore, our diplomacy, our foreign policy will be, to a very large extent, be informed by our historical past. Yeah? There are others, of course, determinants of foreign policy. I'm not an expert in foreign policy, but like I say, Mheshimiwa, you remember we discussed this in class?
Yeah.
He said, diplomacy is a multidisciplinary subject. It is related to various other cousins, foreign policy, international relations, conflict studies, you know, even religious studies. I mean, diplomacy is a multidisciplinary subject. But one of the tools that is used by foreign policy is diplomacy. Yet diplomacy is not foreign policy. These are two distinct subjects. But they are so interconnected, so interlinked, that even scholars of either diplomacy or foreign policy confuse each other. I can cite many.
Okay. Okay.
And
And we are due for a break. It's already 8. So let's take a break. When we come back, we'll continue this thing with this discussion about how our lack of identity affects our diplomacy and international relations, even in the manner of dressing. I recently read somewhere someone criticizing the newfound fashion by the president, saying that it is looking more like communism. I don't know how I don't know where that idea came from, but we'll be discussing that after the break. You're watching Morning Cafe. We continued with our special coverage of the King Charles III visit to Kenya. Let's take a break now. We'll be back with more. And we continue with our special coverage of the visit by King Charles III to Kenya. He arrived yesterday evening at 10:30 p.m. and today he has several engagements, key among them at State House Nairobi, where he's expected to receive full military honors. And Queen Camilla will be meeting the First Lady, Mama Rachel Ruto, who will be taking her through some of the activities she has taken part in. And now with this visit, it is a good time to examine Kenya's identity, Kenya's DNA, how we relate with the British, our former colonial masters. And to do this, to help us with this conversation, I'm still with this distinguished gentleman in studio, Mwalimu Martin Nguru, international diplomacy expert, Dr. Moses Onyango, international relations expert, Honorable Kipruto Arap Kirwa, former cabinet minister, who has also served as an ambassador for Kenya, and Dr. Edgar Githua, international affairs, diplomacy and security analyst. Now, just before the break, Dr. Onyango, you wanted to comment on this issue of Kenya's identity vis-a-vis how it affects our diplomacy and international relations. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you. You posed a question whether our embracing of or our close association with the mannerism of the British puts us at a weaker phase in terms of negotiation. I would say not really, because how I dress or my manners would not deeply affect my negotiating powers. President Obama once said that when it comes to reading ideas or books that are written by other cultures, for example, Greco-Roman ideas, or the American ideas or British ideas, scholars or people who are interested in knowledge production should never put a barrier on what to read and what not to read. A good scholar should read extensively and intensively, but do it with a critical mind. So within that particular framework, what puts us at a weaker stage is more than the embracing of mannerism. It is lack of critical thinking. And I would like to give an example. More often when an African regime takes over government, the first thing that they would do would to employ their relatives or kins or clans mates or people who are associated with them in business, but not necessarily people who have the expertise. For example, Mheshimiwa Arap Kirwa here. I'm meeting him for the first time. I've seen him several times on TV, and I was saying it's a pleasure to meet him, Mheshimiwa, because I only see you on TV.
Thank you.
But he's a sharp Kenyan mind. Now he's saying he's unemployed. Why wouldn't you employ such a sharp mind to go and negotiate for you in WTO and bring things back home? Why would you take your relative who is not qualified to go and just do shopping in New York or cities in Europe and come back and sell out Kenya in terms of negotiations? So what is important in negotiation is the merit, the skills, not what we wear, not what we have embraced from other cultures.
Okay.
Yes.
But coming back to what we wear and what we've embraced from other cultures, Honorable Kirwa, a lot has been said about the kind of dressing you have today.
Yeah.
And it's something very close to what the president is wearing.
Yes.
A lot has been said about his fashion. And there are those who equate it to being close to what the communist leaders wear. Yeah. And that could mark a departure from what we are used to. Our presidents wearing the British way, dressing the British way, proper suit. What do you say to that?
One, I do appreciate, I think he's come to the realization that in Africa, certain seasons you need to dress down in terms of easy wear. And I've come to realize he's wearing like mine, but you see he has more pockets because possibly he has more to keep around himself than me. Number two, I want to say an attire is just an external expression. The most important thing is what Dr. Onyango said earlier, that Mwalimu Nyerere was a serious thinker. He was a philosopher, in my opinion, and he was able to inculcate that kind of culture in the minds of young Tanzanians. I remember I had the misfortune of having gone there as a product of blue squatter displacement. And I was in Tanzania for 10 years, 62, 72, before I came back to Kenya. And I remember in the school program, the issue of Tanzania was very important, so that the young Tanzanians were able to get into the system, to inculcate them into the system of being a Tanzanian. And he did not only do that in the program, he was also able to act and demonstrate himself that being the president is just being one among many, and he's doing a job like any other job. I remember in 1965, he had to call his bank manager to reschedule the loan because he had paid house loan, because he had paid school fees for his children. And it made Tanzanians, and those of us who were in Tanzania, walk tall in the street, that if the president, whose face is in the money, can call and reschedule a loan because he has challenges emanating from school fees of his children, it makes you feel you have every reason to want to fight for your country. And it was demonstrated here. Kenyans are not as bad as people fear. In 2003, policemen were being arrested for seeking bribe because the Kenya of that day believed that the regime that was in town was willing to take the taxes and do some decent job out of that tax. So the most important thing is that as a leader, there are many things you do, there are many things you tell us, but people will emulate you. Or will imitate you. I don't know, whichever Dr. Onyango can assist me. If you are a thief, there will be more thieves in town. If you are a good person, there will be more good people in town. Yeah.
Okay, Dr. Githua, we may dismiss this issue.
Maybe
yes,
fair down
Mwalimu.
to just add a little bit on that, on the mode of dressing. There are 3 levels of protocol. Yeah, there's high protocol, there's medium protocol, and there's low protocol. So Mheshimiwa here is dressed in medium protocol.
Okay.
Yeah?
Yeah.
He's also dressed in medium protocol. He's dressed in high protocol. You are dressed in high protocol. It's like I am.
Should we be should we be
Well, that gentleman is dressed in low protocol. I mean,
should we be waiting to see what President Ruto will wear when he officially meets the king today at State House?
I don't
will that be a statement
I don't
in itself?
think he would wear this dress. I mean, this
Kaunda suit.
Kaunda, do I call it
His own,
top suit?
Kaunda suit.
Okay, Kaunda suit or Nyerere suit.
He'll be in a formal suit.
I don't think he would wear that.
Okay.
That would be medium protocol.
Okay.
He would be making a mistake, I think, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Dr. Githua, when it comes to issues of dressing and other, even names, we've seen attempts by some African leaders to distinguish themselves from the colonial masters. And it's something that changed the DNA of some countries. Congo, for example, what is now called the DRC, when Mobutu Sese Seko took over, and after a while he was pushing for the Africanization of a lot of those things in DRC, even changing the name from Congo to Zaire, and changing the way people dress. It's that kind of identity that we are talking about. The necessity or the urgency for a free country to delink completely from its former colonial masters.
No, you're right, and I like your thinking and analogy along those lines. Yeah, for me, how I look at it, there is need to construct that unique identity for a nation state. And allow me to take this on a lighter note. In Kenya already, among our ethnic communities, we have our own identities, even from dress code. For example, and let me throw them under the bus, the Kalenjin nation. They have this one thing, if they wear, before you meet them, you know who they are, the brown jacket. You've heard of the brown jacket. They like calling it, Kikuyus, if you want to know of a rich, wealthy Kikuyu man, it's the Stetson hat, and his cowboy boots. So you'll find uniquely Kenyans, ethnic communities have tried to have their own identity, which for other Kenyans, when you see someone, you can try easily and identify them. The Somali community in Kenya, we know them. Nowadays, they are feeling free enough to wear their long, what do they call them? Those kanzus, of theirs. Yeah. We have that. Presidents like Mobutu, presidents like Nyerere were able to now bring in the nation on board because they led from the front. Mobutu Sese Seko used to wear his leopard skin hat and his almost kaunda suit. He used to like those kaunda suit kind of things. Unfortunately, some people labeled them communist, but for the longest time, Mobutu was propped up by the US and the CIA, so that narrative did not sell. So it is, for example, our leaders, once again, constructively trying to show Kenyans, trying to actually, for example, how do it would probably make it a school project, primary and high school project, come up with what can be called a Kenyan costume or Kenyan dress, and have a competition around it, monetize it, such that the best 3 costumes, the best 3 designs actually win some money and some funding from the government, and probably see if Kenyans are going to buy into it. I come back to the issue I talked about, the cultural imperialism. The problem with Kenyans is, and it is a strength and a weakness, is that we are very literate. We're very educated. We are on social media. We have among the best literacy rates in Africa. Our internet is not censored, unlike other African countries. So Kenyans identify more with what they see on social media, what they see in foreign media. Like I said, we prefer watching Netflix and Amazon and Prime Video than our own Showmax and our own, for crying out loud, and I'm not throwing TV stations under the bus. We have TV stations that have gone out and taken an Asian movie and put like Kumbagia, let me just make it. We have all these programs where you find we're trying to Africanize so that the local villager in Kenya can enjoy. But then the bigger question is, are we promoting our language, or is that TV station trying to get more viewership so that they can get advertising revenue? We do not know what that narrative is all about. But Kenyan leaders, and the ministry, especially of the Ministry of Culture, making it a national project to go out of its way to determine within this term of President William Ruto, we are going to try and create a Kenyan costume, create a Kenyan identity in terms of dress code. But there's something Dr. Onyango talked about. We can wear that Kenyan costume, but what are our mannerisms? We still prefer talking English over our mother tongues, our ethnic groups, the ethnic groups we come from. And I don't know, Fred, if I put you on the spot, I don't know what language you and your family speak. You might find your children prefer talking Kiswahili and English more than your indigenous.
You're very accurate, yes.
Exactly, yeah. And we perpetuate it. So in the next 1 or 2 generations, even that little Swahili we are trying to talk about, our kids will not understand it because they want to talk English, they want to talk with an American accent, they want to talk with whichever other accent. So it is a national deconstruction project and reconstruction project, in my view.
Okay.
The Ministry of Culture, well-funded, should just go out and start from the grassroots. Maybe our generation is a bit lost. Of this generation, at least we can all speak our mother tongues. I hope we all can, all right? we will not be put on the spot, but I hope we can all speak our mother tongues. But our children who are losing this.
Yeah, they are not.
Where I teach at university, I know of a master's student who actually takes herself through lessons to learn her ethnic community. And she tells me every day at 4 p.m. to 5 p.m., she sits with an online teacher who is actually teaching her language. And I tell her, for you to have done it at university at this level, I ask her, where did you lose the ball? And she tells me her parents, when they were growing up, would address them in English and Swahili. Yeah. And so they lost their language. So that is where Kenya is losing it in terms of national identity. Where have we lost our national language? Going back to Congo, they speak Lingala. You go to Zambia, Zimbabwe, there's Chichewa, whatever, I think it's Chichewa. Uganda have Luganda, even though it also came through a different bad route. But Kenya, what language unites us? Is it Sheng? Can we call that our national identity, all right? And Sheng is not also proper Swahili. So the Ministry of Culture, Gender, needs to just go back and say, what do we do to reintroduce pride in our ethnic languages, number one, as African, different African nations. And 2, now what can unite us as Africans?
Can we see this as a direct result of the actions of the British government, especially during the colonial era, You mentioned earlier, Mwalimu Nguru, that they adopted the divide and rule, which resulted in so many ethnic identities, and that has grown to have, to some extent, a negative connotation to it. And therefore, we, as a result, do not have anything so much in common that could identify us as Kenyan. Mwalimu.
Well, like I said before, the British and the French had different ways of governance. The French had assimilation. Yeah? Like you had to be taught to behave, to look like a Frenchman. The British had a different way. I think I'm not a historian, but the British had a different approach. And it was more of divided rule. And so, therefore, they did not encourage a common language that could unify Kenyans. They encouraged the Luos to speak their language, the Kikuyus to speak their language, the Kalenjins to speak their language, the Kambas to speak their language. In fact, I remember when I was growing up, that was, I think, before you.
Yeah, definitely.
I did not start learning English until standard 3. I think so. We were being taught in Kikuyu. Yeah. So English was introduced much later, and even then, it was not emphasized on, although it was one of the subjects that we were tested on at standard 7, CP level, Certificate of Primary Education level. It was one of the subjects, of course, that was mandatory at all levels, English, at least a language, either English or Kiswahili. You had to pass one of those two subjects to get distinction. I mean, what was it?
That is at Form 4.
Form 4, yeah.
At Form 4, you had to pass...
You had to pass.
English.
Or Swahili.
No,
either.
No, by then it was English and maths.
And maths.
Yes, if you don't pass English and maths, you will be pushed to the next
Yeah,
division.
even if you had points that earned you
Yeah.
Division 1, you had to be pushed back to Division 2 or something.
Yeah.
So it is, I would say, a making of the British. They did not encourage Kenyans to adopt or to come up or to have a common language, like Swahili, for instance. They should have.
Okay. And it leaves us with questions, because we look at our neighbors and they have those ethnic divisions as well, but they're not as prominent as they are in Kenya. And one may wonder the difference in how, if at all we blame this on our colonial masters, how did they do it differently in Kenya, as opposed to Uganda, for example, which was also under the same kind of regime, Dr. Onyango?
Yes, thank you. The subject of identity is very interesting, but let me begin by saying that identity is a going concern, and it's a social concern, it's a social construction. It is not a given. The British royal family who speak English are actually German, but they are now English because of the language that unifies them. So one can actually engineer an identity through construction. In Kenya now, we speak two national languages, English and Kiswahili. And these are two national languages that are unifying. Therefore, to come up with a Kenyan identity would not necessarily be by discovering a Kenyan dress code. There's no Tanzanian dress code, Ugandan dress code. Though the Baganda try to associate their dress code to Uganda, there's no British dress code. What is there is the English language, the Kiswahili language. So if we want a unifying factor, probably we should look at a sustainable one, and that would be the language. And of course, language is embracing multiple cultures. So how do we, there's this concept, pluralism. How do we live together in our diversity, in our plural identities? I am Luo, you are Kikuyu, Kalenjin. How do we celebrate our Kalenjinism, Kikuyuism, Luoism, Luyaism in the Kenyan framework? Mm-hmm. That should be a guide to our nationality.
Okay. Yeah. I want us to, you have something to add to that?
Yeah, quickly I want to say, from what Dr. Onyango is saying, there is what the late Tom Mboya called positive tribalism, where you accept that I'm from this community and it does not make me different from members of another community. That is a positive way of looking at the diversity of this nation. Each community has some strengths. Each community has some good things to pick from. And, but you see, when the British came here, they created stereotype so that some communities were seen to be thieves, others were seen to be eating more, others were seen to be more social than anything else. So that stereotype we still carry up to today. But the truth of the matter is that there are good people in every community, and there are also bad people even in your own community.
Yes, indeed they are.
Yeah. And to add just one sentence on that, the way the British ran the East African Protectorate,
Yes.
Kenya, Uganda, and later on Tanganyika as a trusteeship territory, was different. They entrenched themselves in Kenya more than they did in Uganda or Tanzania.
That's true.
Yeah? Okay. And so I think their way of governance was a bit different. The way they governed Uganda, the way they governed Kenya, and the way they governed Tanganyika then. Yeah? Because they were more entrenched in Kenya. There were more settlers in Kenya, there were more, So
because the understanding is that, yes, the British colonies were many and they were dotted across the globe. Why is Kenya special when it comes to looking at British colonies? Even on the continental...
Number one, during that time, remember when after the scramble and partition, Germans took Tanganyika, all right? And they used direct rule, which backfired on them down there. They killed King Mkwa of the Hehes. And they really did a lot of atrocities because in direct rule, they came head to head with the language barrier. And since they wanted to be the ones handling things hands-on, they ran into a lot of problems. The British, realizing that the language barrier was one of the biggest barriers they had to navigate to be able to rule, in Uganda, they used the Baganda community as their administrators, who they sent all over Uganda to rule on their behalf. And now what these Bagandas did, they forced all the communities in Uganda to speak Luganda. That is how Luganda became the national language. That's why all communities in Uganda speak Luganda. It was forced on them. They did not embrace it. So the British, through indirect rule, got the Baganda, who are the most progressive, centralized community then, using their Kabakas, their kings. So they say this is a very organized community. The Kabaka has his Katikiro, he has his, the people who help him to rule. So they used the Bagandas to rule. That's how that's how Luganda was spread in Uganda. In Kenya, they used indirect rule and now identified collaborator communities. So in the Kikuyu community, we had these people who are called the chiefs and the senior chiefs. In every community, we had, I don't want to call them sellouts, for lack of a better term, they dealt the card they were dealt with then, and they had to survive. They were collaborators. So they entrenched themselves more in Kenya because of the railway line. Kenya was the gateway into the hinterland, into going towards the East African region, and Kenya was very fertile. So they invested themselves more in Kenya than they did in Tanganyika, because Tanganyika, they only took it after it was taken away from the Germans. And even then, they really did not pay too much attention to Tanganyika as they did in Kenya, largely because of the extractive resources they were getting from Kenya. And it was where their settlers, their people enjoyed staying the most. So, of course, they invested themselves more heavily here.
Yes, Dr. Onyango.
It relates to geopolitics. If you look at how colonies worked. The British were in Egypt, and there they were controlling the sea route, the Suez Canal. And then in Kenya, right in the Indian Ocean, gave them the sea route to India. So if you look at the construction of the Kenya Railway, it was going to the hinterland, Uganda, and going for the mineral resources in Uganda. And Kenya became a settlement. So Kenya became a geostrategic settlement for the British, but not necessarily a colony. So that's the difference.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
In fact, the rail line was even meant to go to Uganda. It was even called the Uganda Railway.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's just that it had to pass through
Kenya.
Mombasa. I mean, from Mombasa to Uganda. Yeah? It was actually meant, you know, to be...
And speaking to just how strategic Kenya was, you could see the number of times that members of the royal family have been visiting Kenya. The current king has been to Kenya at least 4 times as prince. The first time he was in Kenya was in 1971. He was accompanied by the Princess Royal. He was back again in 77. And in 1978, he represented his mother, Queen Elizabeth, at the funeral of President Jomo Kenyatta. Again, in 1987, he came back and he visited Swaziland, Malawi, and Kenya as director of the Commonwealth Development Corporation. His mother became queen while in Kenya and visited Kenya a number of times, even as queen. Time now for another break. When we come back, we'll now come to discuss this issue that many Kenyans are demanding about reparations for atrocities committed by the colonial government. You're still watching TV 47, our special coverage of the visit by King Charles III. Welcome back. You're still watching TV 47, our continued special coverage of the visit by King Charles III. At this point, I'd like to thank Dr. Moses Onyango, international relations expert. He's been with us since 6:30 in the morning, but he has had to step out to attend to other issues. I'm still in studio with Mwalimu Martin Nguru, international diplomacy expert, Honorable Kipruto Arap-Kirwa, former cabinet minister, and Dr. Edgar Githua, international affairs, diplomacy, and security analyst. Gentlemen, we now want to look at this issue of reparations, and it's an issue that not very many people understand. A lot of this discussion has been confined to what happened with the Mau Mau which was towards the tail end of the colonial era. A lot of this is associated with the old people who fought for independence with the Mau Mau. Most of them are in their sunset years now. And some of them are still present with us. Gitu Kahengeri is there, and a few others. A few notable names have left us this year. Now, the conversation is bigger than the Mau Mau. And that is where the disconnect is. That it would appear this conversation, when it comes to reparations, apology, or compensation in Kenya, just the extent of the discussion, many Kenyans do not understand it very well, Honorable Kirwa.
Well, as I said earlier, all communities in Kenya, or most of the communities in Kenya, suffered from the colonial rule. Some to a large extent, some to a limited extent, but some of them were amplified by the fact that it was after the wind of change that blew through Africa that Kenyans knew that there is need to agitate for independence. Because remember, the British took us to war, the First World War. We went to different parts of the world. The Second World War, we also fought for the British, because there are Kenyans who went to BAMBA, others went to Ethiopia, what they were calling Abyssinia, and some went to fight the Italians also in Somalia. And at the end of the war, I think it had become apparent that these guys are vulnerable just like us, because in the war, the casualties were on either side, the British and the Africans. And the Africans discovered that these guys are not as strong as they have been telling us. Now, the Mau Mau agitation came in at that particular time because they were agitating for their land, which had been taken away, and they were also starting systems of education that was parallel to the British system. And they're also saying we can plant coffee. Why are we not allowed to plant coffee? So these are some of the issues that made the Mau Mau prominent, and by which time there were many other people who were almost keen to see the end of the colonial rule. But those who suffered much earlier, like the people of Taita, the people of Nandi, and even the people of central Kenya, whose land was taken away, much of these places like Kiambu, Sianda, all the way to Limuru, they were pushed to the rocks of the Kithunguri, and all the fertile lands were taken away by the British for them to settle. As I said earlier, it was done under some kind of a system that was supported by the administration of the day, but was not in keeping with the people. It was not people-friendly system. So when we talk about reparation, I think it would be good to give the total story of Kenya. Number two, to look for a way of ensuring that you just don't do it in a makeshift arrangement. Let it be allowed to go to the community. What I have in mind is, like, if we have a system like the cooperative system, because if you say you are giving to individuals, one person may come and buy 20,000 acres in Kericho because he has sold a parastatal and he has got the money. And they will say, after all, it has come to the hands of our son. That will not give proper reparation to our people. And also, this reparation is not just being given goodies. It should be something that is going back to the people from the beginning of time.
Yes. A lot of these people who suffered directly under the British rule have already left us. Very few are remaining. Yet, because of colonialism, there are generations after that have suffered unimaginable injustices. Do you think that that has been captured properly? Because yes, we talk about Mount Kenya region and what happened to families, even the land ownership in Mount Kenya. But beyond Mount Kenya, and hence the story we're talking about the kind of literature that is there to document this kind of issues.
Thanks, Fred. And I think Mheshimiwa has captured it very well, that other than the Kikuyu community, who appeared and were prominent during the 52 to 1960 period, other communities had suffered immense losses. The Maasais, for example, I think it's the 1901, 1900 agreement, around that period, when they are made to blindly sign off large tracts of land, simply because they are illiterate and they trust the missionaries who are interpreting the agreement on their behalf. And the missionary is acting at the behest of the British. So they sign them off, and the Maasais are herded into reserves, and they lose their arable fertile ground. That's one. Stories that you keep on hearing about the prophet in the Nandi community, Koitalel Arap Samoei, that for many years he had talked about that there will be an iron snake that will come, and it will come carrying a white man, and he will not be good. And then that's why the Nandis resisted the moment the British came, because the prophecy was being fulfilled. You hear the Nandi community talking about that they want his remains, that they suspect the remains were taken somewhere and archived back at home in Britain. The very least the British could do, if that story is true, humanely bring back these remains to the community. That for me, symbolically and symbolism, will even speak louder than apology. Even if they do not reparate, at least saying the king coming and probably activating and talking to his prime minister and the British government to bring back some of these lost artifacts to various communities. And they can even do it through the Ministry of Culture and Heritage and say the British have found this, they had been lost somewhere, quote unquote, we have found them and we have brought them back. You're going to bring back dignity to these communities. In countries, there's something we call memorialization. For example, why the Rwandese always have their anniversary for the genocide. They memorialize. They do not want to trivialize the genocide they went through in 1994. For Kenyans, I think other issues have overtaken us. We've been caught up in so many things that it is only when the king's visit, it's only during this king's visit that some of these things are coming out of the woodworks. But there should have been a sustained effort by the government to continuously, quietly, just engage the British government about how about returning this? We have this community aggrieved, how about returning this? And free advice to the British government. In these centers, in these communities where they say there are grievances, come and build like a mausoleum, come and build for them like small community museums. Return these artifacts. For me, greater than the reparations. We could be talking about the money, but more than that, it is the memory. And you rightly put it, Fred, there are some of these old freedom fighters who are still like Kahengeri who are around. For him, how much money would he want right now in his sunset years of his life? You give him $1 billion, give him 10 million, how many more years does he have to live, all right? Okay, he could bequeath it to his grandchildren, but for him, I think he just wants to see that the people he fought during the independence, that their bones in Kimathi has been found, there's a mausoleum that has been constructed, symbolic things that will outlive all of us, because money comes and goes, all right? The British government, the last payment they made was around 19.9, 20 million pounds. And then the hula baloo that came out of that the money did not actually reach the actual families. I have a feeling if Kenyans pursue reparations in form of monetary term now, we are going to become a nation more divided. Because part of that money, corruption, and part of that money, it's like squatters. You always find the squatters whose names get found on the list are not genuine squatters. So even in these reparations, we are going to have the same problem. People will be like, some families were rewarded more than others, some communities were rewarded more than others, and this could actually be a trap for Kenyans to become more divided than ever. So for me, reparations, I'm not thinking money, I'm thinking of more of symbolic things. Construct more museums, more cultural centers, where we can return Koitalel Arap Samoei's body and head, some of the artifacts that were picked, some of those weapons we hear that were picked. Bring them back to these communities. Let these communities heal. Okay. Quote unquote, yeah.
Mwalimu Nguru, the choice of words when you talk about this issue is also key. And I just want to to question the significance of some words used in this instance. According to the official communication from Buckingham Palace, they say the king is expected to address the more painful aspects. What we are demanding in Kenya, and the demands are for reparation, apology, and compensation. And those are very different words. What is the risk for the king if he came out and expressly apologized for the actions that the British government the colonial administration took, given the fact that there are already legal proceedings in different courts?
Like my two colleagues have just said, it is more than just reparations or compensation or anything. But it's more. For instance, Dr. Ali has said, bringing back the remains of Koitalel Arab Samoei. The British assisting to identify the gravesite of Dedan Kimathi. You know, they were the rulers then, they were. So they must have recorded somewhere. There must have been records. Where in Kamiti prison was he buried? Because otherwise, we are going to excavate the whole of Kamiti to try and do a DNA test on whose remains are the Dedan Kimathis. But the British must have it in their records. The executioner, you know, what do you call them? The ones who bury people. There's an executioner.
The undertakers.
The undertaker must have recorded somewhere where Dedan Kimathi was buried. It is very unfortunate that Mokami Kimathi passed away recently. And she had wished to give her late husband a decent burial. I wish the British could do that, could have done that before she died. As far as reparations, compensations, apologies are concerned, in my mind, and this is personal, I don't think a king would do that during this visit. I don't think. And I don't think it is the appropriate time for him to do it. Let it be done by the Prime Minister, the head of government, because he is head of state. Yeah? The Prime Minister could, for instance, in the House of Commons, issue a statement, you know, to apologize on behalf of the British government. But even then, like I said before, I'm not aware the past presidents, Jomo Kenyatta, Arap Moi, Mwai Kibaki, Uhuru Kenyatta, and now the current government, ever having asked for any compensation, for any apology, or for any reparations. I'm not aware.
Okay.
What I'm aware of is that Senior Counsel Paul Muite, and I think a British lawyer, Day something, yeah, was it? It's called Day something, Lady. A British lawyer took up the matter in a British court, and they were awarded quite some bit of money.
Okay.
Which I'm not sure whether they were paid. Have they been paid?
I think there was drama around the
There was drama. There's still drama. I think they have not been
question
paid
is
yet.
more
But the
on-
court passed a judgment.
Would there be legal implications when a government officially offers an apology? Could it be seen as an admission of guilt? And therefore, everything else that follows is, yes, you've already admitted, so compensation and everything else will just fall automatically. Is that why there's a reluctance to offer an apology?
Well, like you said, there are 56 Commonwealth countries. Then the British would have to apologize to all the 56. Yeah. I mean, because there were atrocities that were committed in all the 56 countries.
If it's
probably that the levels were different.
But Honorable Kirwa, if at all an apology is as simple as that, an apology, what is the big deal in apologizing? Because yes, they admit that they will address the more painful aspects of colonialism. What is so big? What is such the weight of an apology in comparison to addressing painful aspects?
You know, when you make an apology to an individual, it gives relief to the recipient, but at times it has to be done also under the right circumstances. If it was to be a blanket apology to the people of this country over those atrocities or misdeeds by the administration of the previous prime ministers, it may not just be a panacea. We may need to dig deep and understand. At least President Kibaki, in so far as Koitalel Samoei is concerned, we passed in the cabinet to start a mausoleum, and the government of the day gave 68 million, and they built a mausoleum where the stick Samoei was holding the day of the murder was returned from Britain. And I think we need also to agitate from inside. Remember, 1963, even some people who were still saying they were Mau Mau. I remember some of them were murdered in Meru, and because they were still agitating that they still want to get the fruits of independence, because it was fighting over land. And they were not seeing any parcel of land going to the people. Instead, it was the big boys who were apportioning those parcels of land to themselves. So we need to do that, because even when I was in Ethiopia the other day, there used to be an obelisk in Rome that when I went, I was not special envoy, no, I was Minister for Agriculture. So when we went to FAO, there was some obelisk. I think that's what they call. Later on, when I went the following year, it was taken away. They had to be carted all the way from Italy to Ethiopia. So what we need to do is the remains of our heroes, anything, artifacts, any information that will be able to give that collective focus to the people of Kenya, this is what happened, should be brought back. The other day, as I was driving from Kitale, I offered a lift to 2 young Kenyans in Kirinyaga University. On the way, we talked about the blue squatter system that we mentioned earlier. Then they asked me, you mean there are Kalenjins in Tanzania? I told them, no. These are people who are forcefully forced to go to Tanzania because the blue squatter system removed them from the current Uasin Gishu, some parts of Nandi, some parts of Kericho, and most of the parts of Nakuru, all the way to Nyandarua, because they were occupied by the British. So for them, it is new information. And this is history that is less than 40 years. We came back 1972, the other day from Tanzania. And yet we believed we were Kenyans, like those Kenyans who are here in Kenya. So these are some things that should be initiated by the administration of the day. But I told you from the beginning of time that the big boys in town, they want to behave like the kings and the queens of Europe. And to own Oxford Street, the way those ones own Oxford Street.
Because of time, we need to wrap up this conversation, but Dr. Githua, you could talk about that issue of apology, because it would appear just the word apology itself, not many people are comfortable with it. As you make your final comments.
Yeah, thanks. I'll now look at it from a global geopolitical perspective. This is a permanent member of the Security Council, a nuclear-wielding country, being brought down, quote unquote, on its knees by a third world African country when their head of state comes and apologizes. The optics around, I have a problem with the optics around that and what world media. In fact, the Queen's Counsel and senior counsels in his entourage, I have a feeling I've had a very good conversation with him. Right from even his visit, when we began the show, you began with the question of why did he come at night? For me, I think this whole visit, he wants it to be as low-key as possible in terms of who he is and what he represents. Yes, he's coming as a king, that's a title he cannot run away from, but he wanted his visit to be as low-key as possible, not to create all that pomp and fare. And I do not see him issuing it outrightly as a public apology. He will word it very differently, because he has to leave Britain looking, this is the empire that never sets, or so the slogan used to be, this is the empire that the sun never sets on. So how dare he? Will the British forgive him? Will his countrymen forgive him? All right? For having literally knelt down and told Kenya, I'm sorry for what happened. He could, in semantics, in language, he could just meander around it and probably say that, without saying we are sorry, he could use language like, Britain is looking forward at working closely with Kenyan communities to rebuild their lost culture, their lost history, build the mausoleums. That is as much as he will go in terms of an apology. But outrightly saying we are sorry for what happened. I like your question. I am not a lawyer. I'm not trained in law. Maybe a lawyer would be best placed to answer that question. What would be the repercussions of his public admission that when my mom was in power, we committed atrocities? That could just open a whole can of worms, like what Mwalimu said.
Yes.
In other, you know, in the Commonwealth and in other nation states where Britain was involved. In India, for example, which was a much bigger colony than ours. So I have a feeling he may not publicly say, I'm sorry, but from semantics, reading in between the lines, he will issue it in terms of this is the kind of support Britain is going to give Kenya. We will strengthen our ties, we will increase our aid. That is the apology I'm expecting for a permanent security council power like Britain. That's what I'm expecting from him.
Thank you so much. Mwalimu Nguru, any words to add to that as we wrap up this session?
The other thing I would like to add up to what Dr. Ali has said is that Kenya-Britain relations have been very cordial. We of course began by noting that, and I saw it on The Nation today, I think page 23, where Macharia Gaido has talked about the visit by the Queen, where she climbed treetops as a princess in 1952, and she climbed down as a queen. Yeah. The signet, I'll call it Queen the Signet, because she was not coronated.
Yes.
I have had the privilege of taking some British, I think they were members of parliamentarians, to the Abadias, the treetops, when I was in Foreign Affairs. I was working in protocol. And I had the privilege of staying at the treetops myself. I also noted journalist Macharia Gaido also noting that, or making a remark, or noting that Prince William was just about to get married to a Kenyan. That I didn't know, that bit I didn't know. But what I know is that he proposed to his current wife, Kate Middleton, I think in Lewa Reserve or whatever.
Conservancy.
Yeah, Conservancy.
Conservancy? Yeah, he proposed to her whilst in Kenya. And I was actually very anxious to know where he would spend his honeymoon. I thought he would come back to Kenya to have his honeymoon in Kenya, but he didn't do it in Kenya. But that symbolic gesture of proposing to Kate Middleton in Kenya, the fact that the Queen climbed the treetops as a princess, climbed down as a queen designate, and the many visits that they have made. Oh, that's fantastic. I have had the honor myself, personally. I met the late Queen's husband, Prince Philip, in Mombasa. And I was called, I was in protocol then, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And I was called, and I was told to take the next available flight to Mombasa, because the Prince's jet developed problems. The windscreen, I think there's another day it came off. There's a day it came off.
Yeah.
I think it cracked.
Okay.
And it had to stop over in Mombasa.
Yeah.
It was going to South Africa. It was not going to stop in Kenya. But it had to stay. It had to stop over in Mombasa. And they looked for that windscreen. It was not found in Kenya. It had to be brought in from UK.
Okay.
Yeah. Anyway, that was.
Thank you so much. And
That's
Wanakirwa,
besides the
Yes.
point.
briefly, anything else to add as we wrap up?
I propose, not in the level of conservancy, I propose that we do our housekeeping as a nation and ensure that we rewrite our history in golden letters and allow our people to be given decent send-off and respect they deserve as a people who struggle to make this country stand out.
Okay. Thank you so much, Mwalimu Martin Nguru, Honorable Kipruto Rapkirwa, Dr. Edgar Githua, and in absentia, Dr. Moses Onyango, our panelists this morning, as we continue with our special coverage of the visit of King Charles III. Gentlemen, you'll allow me to go through this editorial comment as we wrap up, and thank you so much for your very well-considered opinions on this matter. Now, last night, King Charles III stepped on Kenyan soil 40 years after the last British monarch, his mother, Queen Elizabeth II, visited her former colony, and 60 years since this young nation managed to free itself from the yoke of British colonialism. It is a visit that bears extraordinary significance, not just for Kenya's past, but also its future. This visit is likely to elicit mixed emotions, as the wounds from this chapter in Kenya's past still run deep. According to Buckingham Palace, the king is expected to address the more painful aspects of Britain's historic relationship with Kenya, particularly the period of British rule and the emergency of 1952 to 1960, a complex, sensitive, and painful period in Kenya's historical legacy. There have been growing demands for an official apology and compensation from the British government for the atrocities committed during the colonial era. Now, the visit provides an opportune moment to address this pressing issue and contribute to the process of healing for the victims and their descendants. The visit comes at a time when the few surviving Mau Mau fighters who bore the brunt of the colonial government's wrath are in their sunset years. They, perhaps more than anyone else, have waited years for this day. With Kenya on the brink of celebrating 6 decades of independence from the British,